Fall was quickly turning into winter, and Grandpa was bundled up on the back porch as we drank hot cider and watched the moon rise high over the trees. He'd been out of the hospital for a couple of weeks, but he was still very stiff, and the cold wasn't helping much. The doctor had told Grandpa to take it easy, and nothing seemed harder for Grandpa. He was highly miffed that he had missed Halloween, possibly his last Halloween, as he kept putting it, and the idea that he couldn't start putting out Christmas decorations or helping me get the fixins ready for Thanksgiving was unthinkable to him. I had reminded him that unless he wanted to spend Christmas in the hospital too, he needed to listen to the doctor. "You got very lucky," I told him. "Your hip healed up after the fracture, but it could have just as easily been broken, and that could have left you in a wheelchair. I don't mind installing a ramp on the house, but that would likely be the end of your hiking days, Gramps." He had done a lot of poo-pooing on this notion, but you could tell that he was thinking about it pretty hard. Grandpa was no spring chicken. He was more than aware of that, and falling victim to one of the old person maladies that seemed to lurk around every corner was something he was pretty afraid of. He didn't like the idea of spending what time he had left in a wheelchair, less mobile and forced to act accordingly, and I could tell he was making plans. So far, the last 2 weeks, I had only moved him between his easy chair and the back porch. He ate his meals in the living room, slept in his easy chair, and drank cider on the back porch. We had switched to something non-alcoholic for the time being, so it didn't affect his medication. Grandpa had taken to bundling up in a large blanket that looked like a bearskin, and as he scrunched up under it tonight, shivering in the slight breeze, I told him so. He laughed, bringing his knees up to his chest. "That's because it is a bearskin. Your grandma gave it to me as a joke, but it was the warmest blanket I ever had. I used to take it on the road with me when I had to sleep in the back cab, and it never failed to keep me toasty." He looked at the bearskin, his eyes growing distant. "And sometimes it warmed others, not quite enough." "What do you mean?" I asked, looking over the top of my mug at him. "Well, once while I was sleeping in the back cab, the warmth attracted something that needed it more than me, something that would never feel warmth again." We sat quietly for a moment, Grandpa waiting for me to change the subject before asking, "Shall I tell it?" I nodded. "Sounds like quite a story." "It is," he said, though he sounded less than sure. "It is, indeed. This was a couple of years after I drank with the Sasquatch. Much like my time in Alaska, I had to prove myself to these truckers a little before they would take me seriously, and after taking a few dangerous routes, they started giving me regular work. I have run everything in my day: live animals, furs and skins, textiles, air conditioners, people's houses, groceries and dry goods, and anything else you can probably think of. I was making pretty good money by that point, and your grandma was happier for it. If I was out of the house for weeks at a time, well, that was the way of it. A man has to pay his way, and thus I was paying mine. I was delivering a load of antiques to northern Tennessee. Not a long trip, but a solid lot of driving. I was about halfway home, roughly another 6 hours, when the yawns caught up with me, and the coffee stopped doing more than giving me the tired jitters. They didn't have a lot of truck stops in those days, and I was too far off to make it to the closest one, so I pulled over onto the side of the road and checked my map, looking for the closest town where I could safely sleep. There was a little spot called Mayfair, about 5 miles up the road, and I thought I might be able to make it that far without wrecking my truck into a ditch. I powered through the head nods and the long blinks and finally pulled into this sleepy little town on the edge of a massive cornfield. Mayfair was like 1,000 other little stoplight towns. There was a drugstore, a bar with a big dirt parking lot, and a K-12 school with that barely limping along look, and a main street that looked like it was in danger of being boarded up. The whole town looked like you could blink and miss it, and I found a spot in an empty lot and pulled in as I put my hazards on. I got out, found a payphone, and called your grandma so I could tell her that I wasn't going to be home in the middle of the night sometime. She told me to be safe and that she would see me tomorrow, and I hung up the phone as I looked around for some member of the local law enforcement. I didn't see a sheriff's office, but I did see a cop car sitting in the building parking lot across the road from the honky-tonk, called the Broken Spoke. He jumped a little when I knocked on his window, and when he rolled it down, I introduced myself and told him I was planning to park in the empty lot across from the drugstore for the night. "That should be fine," he said, "as long as you're gone before they open up at 8. That there parking lot is the owner's, and he might come out and holler at you if you stay too long." I told him I didn't intend to be there past dawn, and he wished me a pleasant evening, and I returned to my truck. The trucking company had a few older trucks that they rented out to the newer drivers, but I had looked into something special. The rentals he had were okay, but they weren't great for sleeping in if you got caught on the road. I'd been keeping my eye peeled and my ear to the ground for one of the newer models, this being before the days of Facebook Marketplace. A friend of mine had a cousin near Atlanta who was selling one. He was retiring, he said, and going into the electrical trade, and he didn't have any need for the truck he had bought last year. The truck in question had an extended sleeper cab, one of the first, and it was a comfy little space to catch some sleep. I locked the cab, climbed into the back, and got comfy, and was just starting to doze off when the weirdness started. First, someone started yanking on the handles of my door. They were locked, so they didn't get very far, but they were really tugging on them, which made me worry they would break them. It started as a hesitant pulling, a testing tug that made a hollow clunk as they tested, and then became the rattling draw of a plastic door. I shouted at them to knock it off, and for a moment they did. I had just settled back under the bearskin blanket. I had just started nodding off when the passenger door started clicking too. I got up and stormed into the front of the truck, yelling at whoever was doing that to knock it off. Stuck my head into the cab, but there was no one there. The windows looked out onto the empty lot, but as the handles clicked, I could see no one outside the window to pull them. I raised my voice then, putting a little power behind it, and as the door pulling stopped, I breathed a sigh of relief. Spirits, as you know, aren't as hard to cow as people think, and I pulled the little accordion wall back into place and snugged back under my blanket. I hadn't put wards on the truck, though I would after that night, and I think even then I still believed it was just drunks or kids playing tricks. Whatever it was, I was pretty confident that I could outlast it. If all else failed, I could just drive a ways. But I wanted to get a little more sleep before I tried that. I was snuggling down again, hoping they had gotten a belly full of scaring me, when I heard the last thing I expected to hear. There was a loud thump on the roof of the truck, and I heard something scampering over the top of the trailer. It was a single one at first, but then it sounded like many feet moving quickly over the metal. One set, then two, then three, then four, and finally it sounded like as many as a dozen. They weren't heavy like adults, and that seemed to add credence to my theory of kids playing pranks. For the time being nearly midnight, though, there sure were a pack of them out tonight. They were running across the top of my cab and trailer like they were having a hockey game up there, and their antics made me worried that they might come crashing through. The roof of the vehicle was thick enough, but the trailer wasn't quite so sturdy. I got up again, my dander up, and came charging out of the truck to confront 'em. I must have looked aside in my undershirt and my pajama pants, and my bare feet as they slapped the concrete. I felt mad enough to spit nails. I moved far enough away to see the top of the truck and got myself a lungful of air as I prepared to yell at those damn noisy kids. "Get the hell off of my—" But as my voice bounced around the empty lot, I let my threats die unspoken. There was no one up there, just an empty trailer in an empty lot in an empty town. I turned back to my cab, feeling foolish as I stood in my flannel and my undershirt, but as I took a step towards it, I could suddenly hear the slap of many feet on the pavement and the skittering laughter of children. The passenger door suddenly opened with a loud, angry snarl, and I heard many feet fleeing the scene. I could see something solid moving away as well, but it wasn't until I got back in the truck that I realized what they had taken. It was my bearskin. Whoever these kids were, they had stolen my blanket and disappeared into the night. Started to go after them, but decided to just let it go. I hadn't seen hide nor hair of those kids, and if they wanted my bearskin that badly, I decided to just let them have it. I shivered in my sleeper cab for a few hours before dawn and then hit the road again. I was still tired. I'd slept poorly, but I wanted to get somewhere else before I laid my head down again. I pulled out of town just as the first cars of the day were starting to run the streets, and headed for the outskirts as I started seeing signs for something called Granny's Country Kitchen, and the closer I got, the more my stomach started to growl. When the sign came up on the horizon, I saw a little blurb that read, "Truckers Welcome," and that sealed it for me. I whipped into the parking lot beside the little trailer that served as a roadside eatery. "What'll it be, honey?" said the waitress in the apron with the flowers on it, and I told her I wanted an egg plate with toast, along with coffee and juice. "Rough night?" she asked as she came back with coffee. "You could say that. What happened? You get robbed on the road?" "Not on the road," I said, looking into my coffee cup, "but once I had stopped for the night, a bunch of kids—" "Stole your blankets?" the woman asked, and I must have looked utterly shocked. "You wouldn't be the first. Let me guess. It was a bunch of kids, right?" "A dozen, I think." 13, she corrected. "It's always 13. We stared at each other for a while, and finally she put down the coffee pot and looked at the guy behind the grill and took a seat. The restaurant was empty this time of morning, and she clearly thought she had time to explain a little. Mayfair was a farming community back about the time of the Civil War.
Like most of the little towns around here, all the men were taken for service, leaving the women and the children behind. There's a story about a small farm owned by a man who left his family behind to serve in the war. The woman had 13 children, the oldest having just turned 15, and when she fell ill, they tried their best to take care of each other. The winter that year was particularly harsh, and it started early. No one saw the family all winter, and in the spring they went to see what had become of the farm and its inhabitants. They found the mother dead, and they suspected that she had died before the snows fell. They searched for the children, their beds empty, the hearth cold, and at last they found them. The oldest had taken them into the root cellar, hoping to keep them warm once they ran out of wood. They had eaten roots and drank the cold runoff that leaked down, and had frozen to death beneath the earth. They found them beneath a bearskin, all huddled together for warmth. The father died later in a battle, and the farm was sold. The new owners kept coming to the constable to report the theft of sheets, blankets, quilts, and all sorts of warm bedding. They found them down in the root cellar, and I imagine that's where your blanket is, too, if you wanted to go get it. They call them the Bearskin Kids, and they're really just looking for warmth. They were cold in life, so now they seek warmth in death. That's what the legends say, anyway. My food came up, and that's when she left me to eat. That wasn't the last bunch of spirits that bothered me on the road, but I was certainly better prepared after that. I always felt a little bad for those kids, seeking in death what they couldn't find in life. I let 'em keep the bearskin. God knows they could use it more than me.
A thought occurred to me as he finished up. Hey, I thought you said Grandma gave you that bearskin, but then you said the kids stole it, so which is it? Grandpa chuckled.
Well, your grandma was pretty peeved when I told her that ghost kids had stolen my bearskin, but it wasn't like it was the weirdest thing she had ever heard. It took some time, but she got me another one for our 10th wedding anniversary. She used to joke all the time that I better keep this one out of ghost hands, and there was a constant stream of comments about how this one hadn't been stolen yet, or the ghoulies hadn't gotten this one. She told me... He paused, some of the mirth dying on his face. She told me on her deathbed to keep it safe, and that maybe it would keep us warm when I came to join her.
We sat in silence after that, Grandpa in his bearskin, and me with my thoughts. You're still here. Thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague here. Always a pleasure to see all my new and old viewers coming by for another one of my spooky tales. If you'd like to support the show, you can always take part in one of our channel offers through Fume or Aura, or you can just click on another video when they come up. I'd really appreciate it. For our newer viewers, we also have lots of playlists and other things if you'd like to get caught up. I know some of my series have been going on for quite a while. If you'd like to get my latest book, there's a link down below that'll take you to my Amazon page. Towesey Homestead just came out, so if that's something you'd like to get your hands on, go ahead and have a look down there. If you'd like a signed copy, you can go ahead and email me from my email address on the site, and I'll get with you about shipping information and ship you a signed copy. If you'd like to support the channel in a more monetary fashion, we also have membership through YouTube, and we've got a Patreon that you can get the information for in the description. We have lots of tiers and everything to suit your needs. Patrons that support on the $10 tier, that's our Ghostly Reader tier, get a book anytime I write one, signed and on their doorstep. As you may have noticed, there's a list of patrons and members on the screen, and I'd like to personally thank every one of them for taking a hand in the future of this channel. Well, that's enough for tonight. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.